Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Egisori, President, Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training. My special guest today is Padraig MacColgain, who is the Vice President, Head of APAC for Colt Data Center Services. You have a big job there.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Very big job for a whole APAC. So just give us a little bit of background on how it is that you're in Japan,
Sure.
working for Colt, running this massive empire for APAC, and tell us a little bit about that later. But give us a little bit of the backstory here.
Sure. So I'm from Ireland, from Dublin, and I graduated from college in Dublin as an engineer in 1989. Mm-hmm. And at that time, unemployment was pretty bad in Dublin and Ireland.
Mm.
Yeah, it was like 18 to 20%.
Gee, that's high.
So the Irish government were quite creative. So they had this program where they would send newly graduated, engineers and others abroad to work in companies around the world. And one of the most successful programs they had was here in Japan. So I know you've been here a long time yourself. And you remember the 1980s, Japan was bubbling. It was really, really doing well. And they had big visions of internationalization, globalization, So they were setting up factories in California, in England, and around the world. So the Irish government and the Japanese companies, they came to a very, what they considered a win-win situation. They got their new graduates to go off abroad, get experience in companies that wasn't available in Ireland. And the Japanese companies got young graduates who could, obviously speak English because they're coming from an English-speaking company, join as entry level and, hopefully in the future, help, their companies expand into the future, into other companies. So
be a sort of reverse export back to Ireland as
Exactly.
a Japan experienced English-speaking engineer.
Yeah.
That's pretty smart.
Yeah.
Well done, Ireland.
Yeah.
Yeah, because most countries probably weren't thinking like that.
No, well, Ireland had a very obviously troubled history, with colonization and stuff like that. And, when it got to like the 1980s, there wasn't a lot in the country for the young people. So the people were leaving anyway. So the government wanted to give them opportunities where they could bring them back at some time in the future. And as you know, Ireland...
That's a bit of long-term planning by the government. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
You don't get too much of that. That's good.
Well, there was a gentleman out here in the 1970s, a guy called Jim Cashman, and he set up you might have met him, he set up the IDA, or the Irish Development Authority in Japan. I mean, that was a government program.
Never met him. I got here in 79.
Yeah, he was still here in the 90s when I joined.
Was he?
Yeah.
I didn't run across him now.
Yeah, so what he did was he was here to bring business to Ireland, but at the same time, he made all these contacts with all these Japanese companies. So he was able to go to them and say, well, could you take a graduate, same conditions as you take your own graduates. The only difference is we'd like them to have their own room in the dormitory. Yeah. Because as you know, in Japanese companies, they double up. And they generally stay with a senpai. And the senpai will have the stereo and all the other stuff for the kohai to come into, to help them, in the dormitory. Right. So we all joined these Japanese companies. I think in my year, 1989, like 65 people came over from Ireland. And I joined a company called Hirose Denki in Yokohama, which makes connectors. So I was in the coaxial connector group with a chap from Galway. But people joined Ricoh, people joined Fujitsu, Canon, Alps Denki, all of these Japanese companies.
Excellent companies.
NEC took a lot, so yeah. So it was really good for, people to get experience and, get a grounding. Because when you join one of these traditional Japanese companies, you've no choice but to learn some of the language. It may not be pretty, but you have to learn the language or you just won't survive. Yeah.
I guess I can't remember exactly when that finished, but I suppose in those days, everyone was probably working 6 days a week as well. Was it that time or we changed by then?
We were not working 6 days a week, but if there was a holiday in the week, you worked the Saturday to make up for it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So if Tuesday was a holiday, you'd work on the Saturday.
Yeah, when I got here, 79, all the schools are open on Saturdays, all the companies are working on Saturdays. I can't remember what year they stopped doing that. I wonder whether it's further. But lucky that you had the Saturday to catch up for that week holiday. Yes.
Exactly.
Don't miss out.
Yes.
And I guess it must have been quite an amazing experience coming, like you've got such a different culture, the language element, the work style, Japanese perfectionism, the hierarchy, that artisan, thing they've got going here. It must have been amazing for you.
Yeah, well, one of the big challenges I had was I had to do a lot of technical drawing. And when they first put you into the engineering team, they make you do all the drawing by hand. Wow. And you'd have to use different pencils and make sure it was exact and perfect. And I was there for like 6 months when I realized they had a CAD room next door and all the actual drawings were done by computer. But they put you through the 6-month program, so that you can learn and appreciate, how to draw properly.
That's a very Japanese approach.
It really was.
Yeah.
But at the time, I didn't really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll bet you, especially when you found out there's a CAD room next door. What? I've been wasting my time here. What are you doing to me?
Well, I'd make a drawing. They'd photocopy it. And then on the photocopy, they'd mark it in red, all the places that had to be corrected. Like the letters were too big, or the letters weren't the right shape, and I was like, this is my language. You're telling me how to write A's and B's properly. And well, actually they were correct. The attention to detail was really,
right?
Yeah, incredible. Yeah.
And I think for all of us, that's like the Japanese word komakai, very detailed. And I'm an Aussie, we're a big country, big picture sort of things. And you come here and everything's like so specific. My wife's Japanese, so she's really on that detail. And I'm like, hey, it'll be fine. No, it won't be fine. It's got to be like this, and you always have that constant tension between sort of, she'll be fine. No, it's not fine. So do you actually, do you still have any contact with those companies or with the group who came over?
With the group, yes. Quite a lot of the group are still in Japan.
Are they?
Yeah.
Really?
Some of you probably know. But some of them went back, and I'm still in contact with them. Some went to America, some went to Germany, some went to France.
Because it's a sort of crucible, heated crucible moment, isn't it?
It really is.
Young people, I suppose mainly guys, I suppose.
Well, about 10% women came.
10% women, right? Yeah. And you're thrust into the sort of hard end of things here.
Yeah.
The food's different, everything's different. It's like, take your shoes off, take your slippers off, da-da-da-da. And then you go through that together. I mean, you might have been in separate companies, but it's a similar experience, I'm sure. So it's a bit of a bonding thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So in my company, there was one other chap from Galway, and we only worked together for like 14 months, but we're still very close.
I'll bet.
Because it was such a shock to the system. That it really, bonded us. And I think
you two life preservers in the ocean together, right?
Yes, exactly. Because you get through a day probably by a good conversation you might have with somebody, because in the beginning, when you couldn't speak any Japanese and everybody's working at their desks, there's not a lot of conversation going back and forth. There's not the internet or smartphones or anything like that.
Those days, no.
So you needed somebody to talk to, and that became quite important.
Especially over beers after work, I suppose. That would be a big help. And did that make you a better engineer, do you think, in terms of going through that Japanese attention to detail, coming out of that, your psychology, your approach to the art of engineering, the trade of engineering?
Yeah. So what I think it did was later on, when I started working for a service company. So I used to work for a company called Global One, and then I worked for KVH Telecom here, which was acquired by Colt. So these are service companies. They're telecoms or data centers, but basically they're there to service customers. So what it enabled me to do was, when I sat in front of a customer, I knew what they were thinking.
Right.
Like if I was there with a colleague from abroad, and the customer had lost a little bit of data 3 weeks ago, he's like, it's okay, don't worry about it. But I would understand, from his point of view, no, it's not okay. We need to know why we lost. Why did we lose data 3 weeks ago? Yeah. Where has it gone?
What have you done to fix it?
Yeah, and how do you know it's not going to happen again?
Yeah.
So it sort of changed my mindset, to think about it in those terms, which is quite different.
I remember when I was in the trade promotion business, we had an export of bark.
Yeah.
And the bark had to be no pebbles, no sand, no twigs, pure bark. And the Aussie company in Brisbane, they rang me the day the ship was supposed to sail to tell me it wasn't on the boat. It's like, Jesus, what a nightmare. What a nightmare. That was, that was the end of that company.
Yeah.
And that specificity around reliability, trust, it's something in Japan there's no mercy on that sort of stuff. There's no forgiveness and there's no second chance either. Yeah. Usually it's tough. So how long were you here that first trip?
I've never went back.
Oh, you never went back?
No,
You've been here the whole time since
here,
'89.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
You know, you get married, you buy a house, you have kids. You know, so suddenly 35 years have gone. You know,
What was it? The whole that movie, The Whole Catastrophe? Was it? What was that famous movie? Was it Zorba the Greek? I can't remember.
I can't remember. But
Paddy says the whole catastrophe when he described the wife and the kids and the whole thing. So, wow, okay, since 89. So you've seen a lot of change here then.
Yeah.
And so what happens after you finish what are we going to call it, internship?
It really was.
Exchange, or what do we call it?
Yeah, because when I first came, it was on one of these technical visas that had to be renewed after a year.
Yeah.
And fortunately for me, and maybe less fortunately for the company, when they renewed my visa after a year, they renewed it as a full visa.
Oh.
Which meant I wasn't tied to the company anymore. So then I was able to go and find.
Free, yeah.
And this is one of the things I was thinking about on the way over here, about being part of a community in Japan. You know, there was a lot of Irish people, like there were 60, 70 people coming out every year.
Yeah.
So there was people like before me, people coming after me. And the people who came before, they were really good in sharing knowledge and sharing information. I guess every community is like that, right? But there's people who were like earning salaries which were obviously much greater than mine, which weren't that much older than me, but they showed a certain level of ability to change, you know, to improve, get better jobs and stuff like that. And when you see that happening around you, it inspires you to do the same. So eventually,
so your aspirations,
you're not just satisfied.
Start to go up, and you think, well, hang on a minute. I guess also when you don't know what you don't know, the scale of things is hard to imagine what's possible. And then you see someone who got a really good job with a big company, and they've got the Gaijin house, the expat package, or whatever they've got, right?
Yes,
and you go, wait a minute. I'm in the dorm.
Exactly.
I want that too, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So because of that, I sort of motivated myself, you know, to get another job, and then I worked for a kind of small but less strict Japanese company who were into communications. So they manufactured, they outsourced the manufacturing, like communication boards. I don't know if you remember ISDN boards and voice recognition boards and stuff like that. And from that, I learned a lot about, the frame relay and X25 and different type of communication protocols. So I was able to join a foreign company then after about 6, 7 years, 95.
Right.
And
So in that 6, 7 years, were you always an operator? Were you someone who was running a team by that time, or you were part of a team?
I was part of a team. Basically, I was my title would have been engineer, but the amount of engineering I did would have been very limited.
Right, right. What were you doing mainly then?
Well, a lot of it was designing like communication boards. So I don't know if you know the little at Altera, like programmable logic devices and stuff like that. So I was programming those to make the communications work. So that
I'm not in my head here to be polite. I've got absolutely no idea what the hell you're talking about, but I'm sure people who are watching this understand perfectly. And I'll just nod like I know what you're talking about and act like I understand. But I get the general idea.
You do remember, like around the early 90s when you started going into payphones, they used to have a couple of jacks on them. So one would be ISDN.
Yes.
And one would be a other type of jack.
Yes.
But so it's those type of communication boards we were making.
Okay. And then you joined a foreign company. And what happened
then? So again, it goes back to the Irish community. So I knew this girl, and she was working for NTT Data. And one of her suppliers was this company called Dunsnet, which is Dun and Bradstreet Network. And the guy who was working there, he was going back to California, and he was looking for someone to replace him. And he just said to her, by the way, if you know anybody, could you put him in touch with me, because I need to find someone to replace me, or they won't let me leave.
I can't leave.
Because it's one of those type of things. But so, I mean, one day she just said to me, "Are you interested? I'll put you in touch." And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to do it."
NTT, huge company. Right?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't working for NTT. I was working for Dunsnet.
Oh, okay, right.
The Dun and Bradstreet Network.
They were supplying NTT, right?
They were supplying
major client.
They were supplying all of these type of communication companies that were somehow collecting data from Dunsnet or from Dun and Bradstreet. So I was the only engineer or person in Japan. And that was very interesting because I could work my own hours. I had a desk in a company where we had a switch, and I was managing the communications in and out of that switch. But I could come in and leave as I pleased. I was on the phone. My boss was in San Jose, so he'd finish work around 10 a.m. my time, and then my boss was in Sydney for a while, or Melbourne, and so he'd finish work about 3 o'clock my time. So it was quite good, But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about communications. I learned a lot about the different type of communication equipment and customers. So that was good. And then eventually that company got bought by France Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, and Sprint, a company called Global One. And I moved over to that company. And that was good because it was a much bigger. It went from like myself and one other person to like 50 or 60 people in Japan.
Wow.
And we had a lot more customers, a lot more technology, a lot more infrastructure. And then I started managing a team. So that was around 97, 98.
So when you started managing a team, there was a team of mainly Japanese or foreigners? Or
at the start, it was mainly Japanese. There was some French. There was some Korean. Because it was a real global company, they were one of the companies that would go out and hire people, based on their knowledge and not particularly worry about where they're from.
Right. What was that like, your first, management experience? Because you've sort of been as a start in Japan, your first job, right?
Yeah.
And you're in that Japanese hierarchy, and that's strict, and it's everyone's just hardworking, and it's totally different to the Irish culture and everything. And you grow up in that, and that's sort of like the model, I suppose. And then you've sort of worked in Japan for that period of time, so you sort of get a bit of a Japanese calibration, I guess.
Yes.
On things, but you're not Japanese, and then the people who are working in the team, some of them are not Japanese.
Yeah.
So that calibration maybe isn't going to work so well with some of them. So, what was that first management experience like?
What was really hard was how to manage difficult customers, because when you have a team, and your team is facing a difficult customer, they might have had an outage, they might have had some trouble, and they're really not happy about it. And you have to go and support your team, and you might feel that how can I avoid doing this? But there's no way to avoid it. You're managing the team. These people are reporting into you, and you got to go and support them. So that was a real challenge, especially at the beginning. But it was such a small team that people worked very closely together, and there was a great bonding. There was a lot of nocturnal, shall we say, communication and stuff like that. So it was very nice, but it was
nothing
tough
like
as well.
having a couple of, or a lot of beers after a hard session with an irate client who's berating you for your incompetence and telling you should stop working with them. So how long are you with that? That was actually, you said, it was taken over by Colt. So that was how many years?
So that was a company called Global One, and that was the France Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, Sprint, JV. So then I left that in the end of 2001.
Okay.
And I joined KVH Telecom.
Okay.
And so KVH Telecom was owned totally by Fidelity. And Fidelity had started Colt in London in 1992. And Colt stands for City of London Telecom.
Is that what Colt stands for?
That's what Colt stands for.
Oh,
and the urban legend in the company is that the chairman of Fidelity, the late Ned Johnson, he found it very frustrating working with telecom companies. That whenever you called them up, you couldn't get an answer, or you couldn't get things fixed, or it'd take a long time to install something. So eventually he said, I'll start my own company. And so he started this company in London in the early 90s. They put their own fiber in the ground, because there was deregulation happening in London at the time, so you started to be able to do that.
Wow.
So they built
that's serious, putting the fiber in the ground. That's really serious.
They built out their own networks. They built around different cities in London, because they're a real like metro company. So they'd have go into a city and build out the network. So then at the end of like 99, they decided, well, we'll do the same in Japan. Japan has started to deregulate. You might remember that a lot of companies were getting Type 2 licenses and stuff like that. So they went and decided they'd start their own company, KVH Telecom, and they would build that out on the same model that they built Colt on. But at the same time, as this was kind of like an inflection point in the market, because there was more data centers were coming in. So Colt or KVH Telecom opened their first data center shortly after I arrived in like 2002, which is around the same time that they opened the first data center in Europe and London as well.
Okay, so they were right up there.
So and so I worked there for till 2014, and then 2014 Colt acquired KVH, and then we became Colt as a global company. But basically, I've been in the same company for 22, 23 years.
Wow. And when you were in KVH, again, you were leading a team there?
Yeah, so I was the operations manager, and then I became the operations director. So the difference between operations manager and director is, for the operations manager, I was managing the people who did all the fixing of the network. So they'd monitor it, and they check all the equipment, and if something failed, they'd go and fix it. And then when I became director, it wasn't just the management; it was also the installation and the configuring and the testing and stuff like that.
Sort of end to end.
Exactly. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, and with Colt now, you're vice president in charge of APAC.
Yes.
That's a big job.
Well, when I got the title, we had data centers in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Japan.
Right.
But about 3 years ago, we decided we would realign our market basically, and we'd focus on hyperscale data centers. So we released the data centers in Singapore and Hong Kong, which were much smaller than hyperscale. But I kept the title.
Okay. So most of it is here then.
Yes.
Okay, well, it sounds impressive.
But if we do,
I'm running APAC.
Yeah, if we do build hyperscale data centers like in Malaysia or Indonesia, it'll still be under me.
It'll come under your bailiwick there. Very good. And so again, you're running a team here. So by this time, you've been in Japan a long time.
Yep.
You've built up a lot of experience over these years of just how things work here. Again, I guess you've got a lot of Japanese people in the team, of course. Maybe not just Japanese, but mainly Japanese probably. So thinking back over the years, getting people engaged in their job to follow you as a leader, what have you found has worked well?
I think specifically in Japan, I think, listening is the most important thing, because a lot of the time, if you have a meeting in a Western, I've done this when I've been in London or other countries, people go in and they tell you immediately what they think, In Japan, sometimes they don't do that.
Yeah. Sometimes they never do that. You never find out what the hell they're thinking. Yeah.
And sometimes it's what's not said is as important as what is said. So you have to be prepared to spend the time and not always get an immediate answer to your questions. So I find that, if you want to, really have people engage with you, you have to listen to them, you have to spend time with them, and you have to do it over and over again, because it is.
Do you get some? I'm going to ask the question. Do you get any reverse culture shock in that sense? Because when you hear people are not so direct or so aggressive, perhaps and then when you're in these meetings, it's like Jesus, okay, whoa, tone it down a bit, or even things like eye contact. Like I noticed after living here the first few years that I got out of the habit of making eye contact with people, because that isn't what you know. Without knowing it, I would not look at people. And then someone said to me, "What's wrong with you? Can't look me in the eye?" Huh? What are you talking about? And unconsciously, I wasn't doing it. But when I was in that Western situation, I realized, I've got to readjust here without thinking about it. But do you ever get that sort of experience?
But what I find is that in meetings where there's several people present in Japan, everybody makes space for other people to talk. They make space for different people to come in. But, when I'm in conversations with my colleagues in Europe, if you don't get into the conversation yourself or force your way in, somebody will just talk the length of the meeting, and you won't have a chance. So that is something, I guess it's a learned experience, that you have to force yourself into the conversation and not just sit back. And
I think if you're an introvert, for example, or a rather quiet person, or if you're a very contemplative person or a very analytical person, you probably never get heard. Because the bolshy, very confident, articulate, aggressive types just dominate the airwaves, and you're sort of sitting back, hopefully looking for a chance to jump in, which never ever turns up, so you don't jump in at all. Or I think particularly for Japanese, we often get this request. They ask us, we want our Japanese team. In fact, today I had a meeting at the event we were at this morning at the ECN, right? One of the people I was talking to, a big company, he said, look, we need our Japanese team to be more powerful in a global situation. And, they're just getting crushed in the meetings, and Japan's not being represented properly, and the brand's not being appreciated because they can't voice what they need to say. And that's the Japanese not knowing when or how to jump in, or how to forget about what they're saying and just go straight in over the top like we do, cut them right off and make your point, and then, make a bit of space for yourself and put in your 2 bits worth and then jump back out again. Were they too polite or not aggressive enough, or the English was not strong enough, just get crushed. So, it is a bit of an issue, isn't it? Yeah, and I think, I don't know whether I suffered that, but I do know what you mean. You sort of do tend to find yourself sort of holding back, and you realise, well, this isn't going anywhere.
Well, when I'm in a multicultural meeting, like with people in our UK office or people in the Japan office, often I'll purposely, call on people in Japan to speak. Yeah. Like I say,
give them a space.
Yeah, Tanaka-san, what do you think? Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
And then a lot of the times Tanaka-san won't be okay.
Does Tanaka-san say I'm not okay?
he does when he's given. Obviously, Tanaka-san's a fictitious person.
We know that. We know that.
But if he is given the right encouragement, then yes, he will disagree, and then. When he's listened to, people realize that, everything hasn't been agreed. Because, that's probably something you've noticed. Everyone think, we've had a meeting, we've talked about something, everything's agreed, we can go on now. But a lot of people don't feel that's agreed. They just think they've done the first step of, listening, but they want more discussion and more understanding, which takes time.
Well, even in a Western environment, we get into the meeting room, we have the struggle, have the debate, thrash it out, come to decision, leave the meeting room, that's it. Except that even in a Western situation, people who are not convinced remain unconvinced. And they don't do anything, like they're against it. So they didn't get their way in the meeting, so they sort of, they don't participate. And then you find out later, you've got to go around and renegotiate with them, or, I don't know, put some pressure on them or something. So, that different culture thing, even within our own culture, it doesn't always work out. Somehow there's an agreement, we're going to go ahead. Particularly with the Japanese audience, where they actually don't agree, they don't feel listened to, and they aren't going to do one damn thing about it either. So that's always, nothing happens after the meeting.
What's interesting is between, let's say, a meeting in a Western company and a Japanese company, I find, is the length of time of the meeting.
Right.
We like our meetings to be short, over quickly,
stand-up meetings.
Yeah, get it done and move on to the next thing. But, if something is difficult and complex in Japan, the meeting could take 3 hours, and people they'll talk it out, go back and forth a long time. I get frustrated, but, for the people here, it is important, and you have to let it play out. You have to realize that people want to talk about it until...
And why are they taking so long, Padraig? What's driving that time? Why can't they be more succinct and get it done in an hour or something? What's the thing driving that time?
I guess, I'm no expert, but I guess it is that, they give each other time to absorb and learn and to come to a consensus. I think it's something that goes back hundreds of years of the culture and everything, that people want to listen and want to understand and don't want to, conclude a meeting unless everyone at least has had their say. And sometimes they don't, always agree with everybody. Not everybody gets to make the decision, but they will always, in Japan, give people an opportunity, to, tease something out to the end, which, I find admirable, but it does take a long time.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. But I think often too, it's almost like they're playing, I'll use the word devil's advocate here, in the sense of they are anticipating at an incredibly deep level what could go wrong.
Yeah.
And they're going forward in the time frame to a future situation and all of the possibilities that might have to be considered at this point in time for the future, and go through all of those possibilities first and make sure that that's sort of covered off before we do anything moving forward. Whereas we may think, okay, we'll do it and then we'll work it out.
Yeah.
You know, we'll do it, and if something comes up, we'll no problem. We'll handle it. We'll adjust, and we'll trim it or add to it or whatever we've got to do, and we'll kick it. But they don't. I often find they're thinking like stages ahead, and they're expressing that in the meeting. It's like, drive you crazy sometimes. But anyway.
Well, that brings me back to when I was in charge of operations. And if we had an incident and we had to write a report, so we'd have to write a very detailed report for customers to explain, what was the incident. And we'd start off with the root cause. And then from the root cause, we develop into what are the corrective actions. And it would be like 3 or 4 root causes, very, very deep. And then we'd have to have an internal review. And the internal review would be worse than the customer review.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Because we'd sit in front of either the salesperson or the service manager, and we'd present our report and say, this is what the root cause was, this is why this happened, and this is what we're going to do to fix it. And, inevitably he'd be asked, is this really what happened? Is this really the root cause?
Okay.
And, because in our, culture in the West, that's the root cause, that's the fix. Okay, good, let's do it. But there's a lot of detail going into really understanding what is the root cause. So one of the big areas of study is obviously human error, because, human error, we've seen it many times. It can have some of the most disastrous consequences. So in terms of that, understanding the root cause, and there's lots of Japanese, ways of understanding root cause that have been published widely, and they're very good. They really go down into the deep root cause. And I guess about 15 years ago, we had this presentation on human error from a retired man who used to work for ANA. So obviously, it's very important, working in an airline industry, because human error can have disastrous consequences.
As we saw recently, second day of the year.
Yeah, exactly.
Canada, right?
Yeah. And he was fantastic. He told us all these different solutions around Japan, where they'd come up with types of solutions to problems. Because one that stuck out to me was in Nagoya. There's these crossroads right in the middle of nowhere, and you could see for miles around, but cars kept crashing. So they couldn't figure out all these cars. They could see what's coming, but they still crash. So what they figured out, they went to somewhere in Scandinavia, and they realized that if you plant trees at a certain distance apart, as the car passes the trees, you sort of notice that the light is changing in your peripheral vision, and that brings your awareness to the car traveling. And by just planting trees on either side of the crossroad, it reduced all the crashes.
That's a very abstract concept, isn't it? I would never imagine
I couldn't
planting
believe it.
trees to change the light perspective, to give you perspective on distance and appreciate there's another car in the vicinity.
I'm going to Scandinavia to get this solution.
How on earth did those Scandinavians come up with that idea? That's genius. That's really genius level stuff, isn't it?
So they do go into very deep, ideas about how things happened and how to fix it.
But that's also that attention to detail, the sort of that whole Kaizen thing. I mean, Kaizen is really a minute investigation at a very, 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 very deep level of things, and finding out that small change that is going to have a small improvement, which we don't have too much Kaizen to that degree. I don't think in the West. We tend to be making bigger leaps, maybe. I don't know which is better, but I'm just saying, psychologically, I don't think. Well, the Scandinavians worked it out though, so maybe they're
Yeah.
maybe they're good on that stuff too. I don't know. Hats off to them. So, in terms, what else have you found? You talk about listening, getting people engaged behind you as a leader. What other things have worked for you?
I think obviously you have to challenge people. You know, like a lot of the time I spend in one-on-one meetings, you know, and you know people come to me and with problems and issues that they need resolved, and you know, so the worst thing you can do is resolve it for them, right? You got to challenge people to be able to you know, fix their problems themselves by giving them, you know, smaller problems. You know, you break things down, you analyze it with them, and that's in any culture, right? You try and help people to, you know, look at their problems in smaller pieces so that they can handle them by themselves, because you know, if you don't challenge people, they're not going to grow. They kind of end up in the same position for a very long time.
So you think about getting ideas from people. Often in our positions, we're higher up the totem pole, probably plugged into the world, plugged into senior management, get a lot of information. We have a lot of experience. We don't have just the Japan experience, have a global experience. So often we're bubbling up with ideas and things occurring to us, and we're stimulated by many, many things. And one of the dangers of that, though, is that we become the total conduit of idea creation.
Yes.
And we're the ones suggesting, well, we could do this and we could do that. And I thought about this and I read about this and I heard about this, and not actually get ideas to come up from the team. So thinking about getting ideas to come up from the team, what have you found works well?
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite anecdotes is the boss who comes into the room and has, you know, some project or something he wants to launch, says, "This is what I think. What do you guys think?" You know, and of course everybody goes, "Oh, great idea, boss."
Great idea, boss.
You know, so
boss, you're a genius.
Yeah. How did you come up with that? So what I do think is, you know, try to hold back. You know, try not to say something, you know, right away. Try to give other people the opportunity to come forward with ideas and then tease them out. You know, and don't give, you know, what you feel until the very end. I think that's quite important, you know, because you can, you know.
That's often though what happens though in a Japanese meeting, isn't it? Like the most senior people often don't say anything.
Yes, exactly.
You know, you get in these meetings and they have the shacho and the, you know, C-suite, and they have a bunch of other people there. You're there, and they're discussing something, and these people often don't say a word. You know, they sit there, you wonder, why are they here? You know, but they're listening. But they're not. They're letting their people talk, and maybe after the meeting they then have a conversation with people. But always found that a bit surprising. I sort of, in a Western context, the president will be taking a lead, and you know, this is what we're going to do, and blah blah blah. You know, this is my idea. What do you think about that? So yeah, I guess they have that context too, don't they?
Well, I remember, like in the early days of KVH, there was some consultants that had joined. I think someone had worked for Hitachi, and you know, one of them I reported to for a while. And just as you said, he would say nothing for the first 45 minutes of the meeting, you know, and just as things were beginning to wind down and we were, you know, getting ready to go to lunch, he'd ask a question, you know, which is kind of always a difficult question to answer. So, you know, we weren't really sure for a long time, you know, if he was paying attention or what was happening, but yeah, he was taking it all in. We were trashing out what we're going to do, how we're going to report, and then at the end, he'd ask something that was quite difficult to answer, and then we'd have to get back to it at that point, you know. So it was a learning experience. Yeah.
And I guess the other thing too is, you know, building trust with teams. Now you've worked in different organisations. You've had to move from one to another, and you know, when you come into a new organisation as a leader, they all know each other. They've had a previous boss.
Yes.
We turn up.
Yeah.
We're not Japanese. And you've got to build that trust with people to get anything done. So what have you found works well to build trust with Japanese teams?
Well, because I'm generally coming from a technical background, I always like to go to the engineers and ask them to explain to me in very basic technical knowledge how it works. You know, what are the issues they're facing? Because I'm not sure, but I guess this is the same in any type of field. But definitely in technology, in you know, people like to talk about what they're doing, and they are interested that people are interested in it. So I remember my first day in KVH, I had the design engineer talk me through all of his networks, all of the stuff that connected, how it connected, all the different buildings. And I spent like 2 or 3 hours with him, and I found out, well, for me it was very good because I learned, what the company was doing. But for him, I felt we built up quite a relationship after that, where we could talk to each other and he could go to me, And it was the same in data centers, because I was moving from, a telecom industry to, data center industry, which is quite a different industry, but although it's still technical. And again, I was able to go and listen, to the engineers and find out what they're doing, what their issues were, how they were coping with those issues, I think that was most important for me.
Anything else you found works well in terms of as a leader in gaining trust?
In gaining trust, that's a tough question. Other than that, I always found that showing up is really important. I know working from home was really hard for me.
Was it?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it to some extent, but going back to the office, 2 years ago about now, that was hard.
You guys went back pretty early then.
I went back around May 2000.
Oh, you went back, or everyone else stayed at home, or the whole team went back?
We're like what they call hybrid working.
Okay.
So flexible first.
Right.
So a lot of people come into the office maybe 1 or 2 days a week. I'm there pretty much every day. And I feel that
Is that because that's how we've grown up? I mean, I'm like you. I'm prefer that, but I wonder, is that just because that's my whole working life has been, that's the sort of model, and you sort of want to be around people and observe what's going on and talk to people and find out, what's happening. I just wonder, is that a sort of generational thing, do you think, or?
It's hard to tell, but I do feel that, if somebody wants to talk to me, I'll be there. If someone wants a face-to-face meeting someday, I'll be there most days, And, often, people are, reticent. They don't want to set something up. But if they bump into you at the, the coffee machine or something like that, it's kind of good, that they can just open up on a topic or something like that.
Bridge into the conversation.
But also from my own point of view, part of being a leader, I guess, is observing, seeing, who's in trouble, who's not in trouble, who needs help, And sometimes it's, you can see that rather than hear it, So when you're all working on Teams or Zoom, you can't always tell who's in trouble or who needs help.
Especially with mental health issues.
Yeah, exactly, yes.
And, isolation for a lot of people who have mental health issues is the worst possible thing in many cases for them. And it just accentuates the issues, doesn't it? Yeah. And you don't know because you don't know, right? And you don't know how to help them.
Yeah.
We went back, I made the decision April last year that we'd all go back in the office. And the reason for that was I felt that the teamwork was being eroded by not being together. I felt that we were sort of starting to drift apart. And so I said, okay, everyone back in the office. But I had 2 people out of the team who actually became isolated. And then didn't want to come back to the office because they'd sort of grown fond of isolation and not having to deal with people. And then, one of them actually no longer with the company, but one's still here. But I've noticed in the last couple of months that this particular person, so she, has started to re-tribalize. Like she used to come in the office, go to her spot, put her stuff down, not talk to anybody. Like she just brought the isolation from home to the office. And I had a word to her about that, about Aisatsu and, And I just noticed too in the office, because we've got open plan so I can hear what's going on. Not that I'm listening for what's going on, but I noticed that there's a lot more, I'm going to call it casual work conversation. It's not casual conversation about the weekend or the football or that type of thing, but it's casual conversation about clients or training or what we're doing. And I just feel that's a good thing for the team to have those opportunities to talk to each other, express what they're thinking and share ideas and trade experiences and reinforce each other. And I felt that during COVID we didn't have that because we were just in really total isolation. So, I mean, we didn't go back to hybrid. We went straight back to full core 5 days a week, although for the salespeople, they weren't coming in 5 days a week before COVID, so I don't expect them to be here 5 days a week after COVID either. But generally speaking, we did it for that reason, to try and knit things back together again. So, those mental health issues are a bit of a scary one, I have to say.
Well, I think that part of the hybrid working is that it doesn't mean 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 or whatever. So some people will come in for a meeting and then go back home after that meeting, you know, which, you know, gives them the flexibility. They don't have to travel during the peak hours when the trains are all crushed. You know, they can collect their kids, you know, they can cook dinner, whatever they have to do, and then they can work. And because we're a global company, we tend to have a lot of meetings like after 6, like with our head office in the UK. So it's kind of unfair to have people working till 6 o'clock in the office and then expect them to join calls until 8 or 9, you know. So people can take time in the middle of the day and do what they need to do and then join a late call. But yeah, I mean, for myself,
it is good, isn't it? The flexibility part is good, isn't it? Yeah.
You wonder why we never had it before. But I mean, you know, for myself, I like being in the office, you know, and it helps me, you know, perform better, you know, I think for myself, you know. So.
What about culture? You know, every company has its own culture, and then you have sort of C-suite tries to create a culture for the organization, and then by country, you're going to have that culture of that country, and then by section, you're going to have the culture of that section, and then there's you as the leader, and you're trying to put a sort of culture variation that suits you on the team. Like here, I'm the boss, so I have, this is very much a Geishke company, and I'm the only foreigner, you know, multinational company, I'm the only foreigner in the whole company, but it runs like a foreign multinational company because of me, and I put that culture out because the people who work here, they don't want to work in a Japanese company. They want to use their English. They want to have a little bit more flexibility. So I don't try and out-Japanese the Japanese. I actually appreciate that that's why they're here. And I can't compete with a Japanese company. I can't out-Japanese them. But I can provide that environment. So there's a certain culture here. And then we have Dale Carnegie, which has got a particular culture as well. So what have you found works well in building a culture in Japan?
So one of the challenges we've had coming out of COVID has been how to have more engagement events that brings people together. And so last year we started, I mean, everyone, most companies I think do like the Bonenkai and the Shinninkai and stuff like that. But, you know, we asked the team, you know, to come up with some other ideas about stuff they could do that would be interesting. And, you know, some of them have come up with really interesting ideas. Like we had one of those events where, you know, people would write down, you know, 2 untruths and 1 truth about themselves.
And
then people
like
had
a game show type thing.
And then everyone had to do it, you know, and then people had to guess which was the one truth, which is, and it was everyone got into it. So we really learned a lot about each other during that event.
Isn't that interesting? You know, often you work so closely with people and you know nothing. I've related this story before, but many, many years ago, we had an offsite when I was working for Jones Lang Wooten. We went to this, was like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And the first, we got there at night on the Friday after work, and then the Saturday morning, this huge big tree, we're all outside, and we had to get up in pairs. So I'd interview you, and I'd get up and I'd introduce Padraig, and then you'd introduce me. So I wasn't talking about myself, I'd be talking about you, which sort of takes some of the pressure off.
Right, yes.
And then as people went through that, we got a group T-shirt, and we put it on. So physically, the colour became one colour. It was a very fascinating unification thing, actually, of a unified spirit. It turned out like that. But listening to some of these stories, like people I work like meters away from, like, oh, you were born in America. Oh, you've got a pilot's license. It's like, what? Had no idea. So that's and I think for Japanese too, learning about each other, you know, is a big thing. I mean, in Japan, you know, you find out someone got married after the event, you know, and you found out like weeks later they got married. Really? I had no idea, because they won't tell you until the deed's done, and then there's no possible loss of face if it didn't happen. You know, it's like, wow, okay. So
I noticed. I mean, we specifically went out and we were hiring a department assistant, you know. So, and she's what you call it. She's not just for one person. She works for everybody. And, you know, when in the hiring process, we said we need more engagement. We need somebody who can bring people together and be a hub. And, you know, she you know, gladly took that on. But, you know, one of the other events that she organized was an event they called Born This Way. So
Born This Way.
So you know the song by Lady Gaga. So as part of the Pride Month, so they got everybody to send in photographs of themselves as a child.
Oh.
And then the event was to guess which person was which.
Oh, that would have been fascinating.
It was really good, and it was very hard.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
But it also showed people being a bit vulnerable to each other.
Yeah.
You show your baby pic or your pic as a young kid or something. It shows that you're prepared to go out and be a bit more open, the next day. So
the thing about vulnerability in leadership terms is interesting, isn't it? Because I grew up in business when it was the boss knew every part of the job.
Yeah.
Boss was the ultimate authority.
Yeah.
There was no overlap of private and work. It was completely separated. You didn't mix the two. Everyone was, becoming hairy-chested individuals. We're going to do it ourselves. There wasn't a lot of collaboration, a lot of cooperation, really. A lot of individual responsibility, accountability. And so there was never any sense of the boss being vulnerable.
Yeah.
In front of the team, the boss was the sort of island, the rock, last line of defense, impenetrable, type of thing. But I wonder today whether that's actually a model at all, and whether that vulnerability, not incompetence, not weakness, but that having the strength to be vulnerable, let me put it that way, whether that's something that's really changed. What do you think?
Oh, I definitely, and I think it should change, because, you don't want people just pretending to be something that they're not. You want people to be able to be open and honest and somewhat transparent as much as they like to be. So I think it is changing. I think it's a good thing. For old guys, like myself, at times it causes some challenges, but that's a challenge we have to get over. And I do want people to be able to come into work and be themselves, and also if they have a difficulty, to be able to come to their manager and say, I have this difficulty, can you help me with it? And not because in the old days, when I first started working, you couldn't do that. It was really hard.
Couldn't do it. Because in this company, we've had a number of people who've survived cancer.
Oh my God! Yeah.
And so there's got to be a lot of flexibility around having surgery, chemo, recovery. People have different things with their children, which can be very, very, difficult.
Yeah.
From a health point of view, from adolescence, getting into trouble point of view, the whole spectrum. When I was growing up, the boss wouldn't even come up in a conversation. But today, as the boss, you're expected, I think, to be empathetic and be flexible and allow people freedom to adjust around that, and they've got to take time off, and then we have aging parents. In the old days, your parents didn't last that long. They were sort of, literally, they were gone. So the whole thing about taking care of aging parents wasn't around, because the parents died and disappeared. But now today we live much longer, so that's a whole thing that didn't happen before. So you've got to go and take care of your mother. Usually it's the mother because the dad's already gone, And again, bosses have got to be flexible around that type of thing, which certainly wasn't the case when I was growing up. There was no flexibility. You had to be at the office and work hard, So I think we've had to change a lot, haven't we?
Yeah. We had an experience yesterday. We went to Tortoli for the weekend, myself and my wife, and we were, just waiting to get on the plane. And the lady beside us, she got a phone call, and it was clearly from her son, who was having difficulties at school, that he couldn't go back, and she was trying to coach him and get him back to school, and he had left and stuff like that. And it was really heartbreaking, trying not to listen to it, but also understanding she's about to get on a flight, probably for her job or something, and she has this challenge at home.
Yes.
And you kind of wonder, well, everybody has these challenges, so you don't really know what people in your office are going through. So you have to be available and able to, as you said, be empathetic.
Padraig, if you're going to give some advice to someone who called you up and say, hey, Padraig, I've been given this big job in Japan. They want me to go over there and run the organisation. But, hey, Padraig, I don't speak Japanese. I don't think about Japan. How do I become successful here as a leader? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I would say just throw yourself into it. I mean, this country is so rich in so many things. You just throw yourself in whatever you want to do, and then share it. So if it's running, if it's hiking, if it's pottery, if it's aikido or kabuki, whatever it is, just really get into it and then share it with the people that you're working with. And I think they'll respond in kind. That's how I feel.
Are you a big shakuhachi man, or doing kudo, or I don't know, track running, was it trail running or something? What are you doing here?
Well, at the moment I'm running, but in the early days when I was younger, I used to play soccer.
Oh, okay.
And I used to play for the company team. And
wow, okay.
Then later on, in the KVH days, we had a 5-a-side team that we used to go and play on Thursday nights or something.
Yeah.
Well, it was mainly just a kick around at a local gym or something like that.
Right.
I got my ribs broken twice by.
Really? Wow, pretty. Yeah. Everyone's pretty vigorous in the game.
Yeah,
they're taking it pretty seriously.
No, but I mean, once you get involved in these type of activities with people, you build up the relationships that go beyond work. So if you're coming here for the first time, and if you just stick to the work and stick to the business, it'll be hard. But if you go out and get involved in multiple activities with different people and share them in the office and stuff like that, I think you have a very fulfilling life in Japan.
Yeah, and often you learn how things work here too.
Exactly.
The hierarchy, you work out language too, and the culture, customs, values, all of the sort of wonderful things of Japan, which if you're just living an expat life and hanging around the Tokyo American Club like me, often down there at the gym or whatever, you may not get exposed to that. So what else could they do to be successful here?
Well, you do have to make some effort to learn Japanese.
Okay.
You do I mean, you may never learn it, and that's fine, but if you're staying here for, say, a 3-year assignment, you should be able to, understand the hiragana, katakana, and basic kanji, and some basic conversations. As you say, people who live in Nishiazabu and go to the Tokyo American Club, they don't have to do that, but it kind of diminishes, your experience in Japan without being able to do that,
Although the statistics don't show it in the sense of the Japanese command of English in terms of their test scores has improved at all, but I do feel that younger people do have better English. I mean, when I got here in '79, man, people would literally come up to me on the street and stop me and say, "Can I practice my English with you?" Total strangers, right? Like, whoa, okay. I'd speak a bit of English with them. They were desperate, and I was teaching English as a part-time job to get the money to go down to the Hombu Dojo and do my karate training, down in Himeji, and that type of thing. But I think there is that aspect to it. What else could they do, apart from what we discussed to really be successful here as a leader?
Well, I think networking events are kind of important as well, because and particularly not just that I've been to Tokyo American Club a couple of times, but the one we're at today, the ECN event, I think that's a good networking event.
It was like 100 people there this morning,
and there's a lot of different cultures there. There's also a good Chamber of Commerce that you can join. So the Irish Chamber of Commerce is very good. They have very good social nights, and stuff like that, as well as the Irish Network and stuff like that. So, I think you should try and network as much as you can.
I think also there's that learning curve too. I mean, often when you come here on your own, headquarters can't really support you on the ground. It's hard to ask your staff things because you feel a bit, embarrassed that you don't know. Your spouse can't help you because they're in the same boat as you are. So who do you turn to, And this is where you're right. Having people like you and me, for example, who've been here a long time, you have a lunch with us and you say, hey, listen, I've got this issue and I'm not quite sure. And, in 5 minutes, you're going to get a spectrum of possibilities that would take you years to put together yourself through trial and error, and give you possibilities and things to think about. And maybe it doesn't exactly work because we don't have that degree of knowledge of the company or the situation, but just the general breadth of complexity and seeing how you can look at it from different angles, that in itself is so valuable, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And you've got to have the access to those people to be able to do that. If you're sort of rabbiting away, working in a little zone all the time, you're never going to have that opportunity, are you?
Yeah.
How about your definition of leadership? How would you define leadership?
I really think leadership is listening. I really think more than the leader on the hill pointing to the way. I really believe in collective, leadership. Building a team, giving people opportunities. Because some people are really smart and they know it all. I've realized at this stage I'm not one of those people. And I do need the people around me to be successful. So I think finding out who are those people, getting them on board, listening to them, and giving them the opportunity to be successful. I think that's really true leadership.
But I think that the complexity of business today is such that you can't do it all yourself anymore. I mean, I grew up like that. Do it yourself, but not now. Not now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously one of the great leaders was Steve Jobs. And if you go through
is this Steve Jobs version 1 or version 2?
Well, that's the interesting thing. If you go through the internet and you see the different interviews that he did through the different stages of his life, you can see how he evolved. I think in version 1, he was very direct and authoritative and leader. But as he came back into the company in the mid-90s and you see the type of off-site meetings that they videoed and now you can access them, he was a lot more collaborative, So I thought he was quite interesting where he changed from his early life to his later life,
Well, that's right. I agree because he was a bit of a tyrant in the first stage. And then, as you say, somehow he transformed, became more empathetic, understanding, and maybe more Zen-like, I guess, in some ways. Yeah, interesting.
I heard one good interview with him the other day. I just came upon it that he said that in his early business, they hired all these managers because they wanted people managers. And he said they were terrible, that they couldn't manage anything, even though they all came with all the qualifications and experience. And then he said that, so we got rid of them. And then we realized that the best people managers were the people who were doing the work themselves and were reluctant managers. Oh, really? And when they coaxed these people into being managers, they were far more successful than the other people. So I thought that was very interesting.
So look for reluctant managers and coax them into leadership.
Well, it could well be, yeah.
Could well be, okay. Well, Padraig, thank you.
Well, thank you very much,
fantastic.
Greg.
Thank you very much.
Very enjoyable.
Join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.